I've been lost in Chinese poetry translation for the last couple weeks. My translation project is still working slowly through the poems in Chapter 5 of Dream of the Red Chamber. There are dozens of these poems, and I really want to get to the heart of each of them. Now, these poems provide a pretty big challenge for any translator. For reasons I don't quite understand, Cao Shuiqin, the man who we think wrote the book, wrote predictive poems for characters that he hadn't introduced yet. And it means that when you translate this book, you're faced with a dilemma. You either spoil the characters to explain the poem and risk confusing the reader, or you wait until the character actually comes up and slowly refer back to the poem. Now, some of these are really easy to figure out. I mentioned this poem in an earlier video, for example. The line, Yu Dai Lin Zhong Gua, Jin Zan Shui Li Mai at the end is kind of controversial, but it makes it obvious who the poem is about. So that line means a jade belt hangs in the woods, a golden hairpin is buried beneath the snow. And in the Chinese, Yu Dai Lin is simply Lin Dai Yu backwards. Meanwhile, Jin Zan Shui is a direct reference to Shui Bao Chai. On that line, Shui and Shui sound the same, and Jin Zai, or golden hairpin, is a direct reference to Bao Chai, which means precious hairpin. That comes from the poetry earlier in the chapter. I already made a video on that one. Now, later in the chapter, the goddess has Jia Baoyu read through a bunch of songs that also describe the fates of the same characters in the same order. The beginning of this series of songs has the first reference to the name Hong Lo Meng, which traditionally has been the name of this book. Right here it says that the goddess orders one of the celestial maids to get the original manuscript of Hong Lo Meng, or Dream of the Red Chamber, to give to Jia Baoyu. The idea apparently is that he needs to read the lyrics to these songs to really understand them. Now, if you're familiar with the other English translations of the book, you'll wonder why I keep calling it Dream of the Red Chamber. After all, neither of those translations use that name. If you go back to the first half of the first chapter, you'll see this somewhat cryptic part. The original name of the book was apparently Shi Tou Ji, or The Story of the Stone. That's where David Hawkes got his title from. There are a number of other names mentioned here. They include the Record of the Monk of Emotion and the Precious Mirror of Romantic Affairs. And finally, there's the 12 Beauties of Jinling, which refers directly to the 12 girls described in the cryptic poetry in the 5th chapter. Now, if you read a bunch of the variant Chinese editions of the book, you'll notice that the earliest editions are referred to as Shi Tou Ji, or The Story of the Stone. However, the first published edition in 1791 was clearly called Hong Lo Meng. That's a direct reference to all this stuff in the 5th chapter. It's kind of a confusing textual story, and it's made even more confusing by what the phrase Hong Lo actually refers to. Hong Lo refers to a woman's bedroom. If you remember, chapter 5 takes place when Jia Baoyu is sleeping in the bedroom of Qin Keqing, the wife of Jia Rong, his third cousin. Her room is described in extremely sensual terms. In other words, her room can literally be referred to as a Hong Lo, a sensual woman's bedroom, and the Meng part refers to the dream that Jia Baoyu has while he's there. Now, Gladys Young and her husband called their translation a dream of red mansions. Technically, you can call Hong Lo a red mansion, but it misses the point. The point is the direct reference to a woman's bedroom and the sensuality implied. And the other point is that chapter 5 really is the heart of the book. In particular, the songs that the goddess has Jia Baoyu read through are quite interesting. The introductory poem starts with this line, Kai Pi Hong Meng, Xie Wei Qing Zhong. Now, as you might already know, I've made a couple of videos talking about Qing in this book, which I like to translate as emotion. And so I would translate this line as, at the dawn of creation, who sowed the seed of emotion? So, what does that mean? Well, we need to check out the next line. 都是为风月情浓，牵着真奈何天. So, we've got that Qing character again, and we've also got some really funky stuff happening here. Feng Yue implies a romantic feeling, perhaps even something erotic. Feng Yue Qing Nong overall means something like the thick romantic feelings or the thick erotic feelings that well up in us. And then you've got this part, 牵着真奈何天, which is kind of bizarre. Naihe refers to the idiom 无可奈何, which means there's nothing you can do. I think that 奈何天 means something like the inevitable heaven, though that's mostly a guess on my part. But 乘着 here at the beginning is really interesting. It means to take advantage of. So you're taking advantage of the inevitability of heaven or the inevitability of fate? I guess my interpretation of that is that you're trying to use your agency to change the will of heaven or to change your fate yourself. Anyway, I translate that line like this. All for this feeling thick as the wind and moon that defies the inexorable schemes of heaven. Well, it's not a beautiful translation, of course, but at least I think it gets the point across, but if I'm wrong, let me know. Anyway, as you can see, it's really difficult to translate some of these contradictory concepts, mostly because it's hard to figure out what's actually going on in the original. Now, the next part is relatively simple. 相怀日寂寥时，诗前语中. That means, these sorrowful days, these lonely hours, I try to express my foolish heart. That's a pretty literal translation. And then comes the kicker. 因此上演出这坏经道佑的红楼梦. Okay, 因此 means therefore or because of this. That part's easy. 上演出 means you're going to perform, like a play. 这, of course, means this. That's part of your first Chinese lesson. You've got this scary looking 4-character phrase here followed by de, so we know that that 4-letter phrase is an adjectival phrase. And then 红楼梦, dream of the Red Chamber. So let's go back to the scary part. 坏经道佑. 坏 is similar to 怀念, which means to fondly remember. Dao, meanwhile, means to mourn or to lament. I think the most proper modern Chinese equivalent is ai dao, which means to grieve or mourn somebody's death. Now, we're remembering jin or gold, and we're mourning yu or jade. Well, we saw earlier how jin was a reference to shui bao chai, right? In fact, the left side of the character chai has the radical jin, so this is almost certainly a match with her. And yu could mean jia bao yu, but that's not going to make much sense. It's more likely Lin Da Yu, whose second given name is Yu. So the last 2 lines of the poem can be translated this way, and thus I performed this Red Chamber Dream, this song of remembering gold and mourning jade. But, it means more than just that. So he's remembering Shui Bao Chai, that's the wife who he winds up deserting. And he's mourning Lin Da Yu, the girl that he loved but who winds up passing away. In other words, the true author of these songs and poems is none other than Jia Baoyu himself. He's writing these at the end of his life, and yet he's reading it near the beginning. Very interesting. And chapter 5 is really Jia Baoyu's reflection back on that life that he once lived, the life that he wound up abandoning in the end. So why did Cao Shuiqin write his book like this? Well, honestly, I've got no idea, but it still is a lot of fun to slowly try to piece this stuff together. Now, the other poems here and songs are a lot of fun, even though it does take a long time to translate them and really get them right. And the more time you spend with this book, the more rewarding it is. Anyway, that's the reason why the poems in Dream of the Red Chamber are so important. There's a lot more where that came from too. Unfortunately, it's not easy to translate a lot of these internal literary references into English, and the references to other Chinese literary works are even harder. Fortunately, though, I have an unlimited canvas on my blog, which means that I can go as slow and as deep as I need to. So anyway, come check it out. As usual, the link is in the description.